Hey, welcome back to Shannon's Kitchen. So last week I shared with you my recipe for Char Siu or Chinese barbecue pork that was so delicious. It's sweet, it's savory, it's so juicy and succulent. It was delicious as dinner just with some vegetables and rice, but it's also very versatile. That's the nice thing with Char Siu. So today we're making some steamed Char Siu or Chinese barbecue pork buns that you see oftentimes at the dim sum houses. So I'm starting off here with some freshly baked Char Siu, and I'll just link the recipe and video down below in the description box. But basically I marinate my pork for about 12 hours overnight in the fridge, and then the next morning I got up early and just baked off that pork, and it's still slightly warm here. It doesn't really matter if it's cold or warm, or even if you wanted to like buy your own Char Siu and you didn't want to go through the work of making it yourself, which is truly not that much work, but you know, it's up to you. Basically the goal here is you want to prepare your pork filling, and that's what I'm doing here. So I'm taking my Char Siu, I'm cutting it into strips and then turning that perpendicular and then just finely dicing it. You don't want quite a mince, but you also don't want like large chunks of pork, because you want it to be evenly distributed, you know, amongst your pork buns. You don't want anyone fighting over pork buns that have more pork in it. So go ahead and just run your knife through that, and I'm adding that straight into the saucepan that I already have my sauce prepared in. So if you ever had Char Siu Bao before, whether it's the baked or steamed version, usually the pork is coated in like a nice saucy mixture. So I just did that off camera. I actually have a recipe for this already in my baked Char Siu Bao video, so I'll definitely link that down below. I added a little bit more 5 spice this time around and some more sugar, just because I wanted the, you know, the pork filling to just have a little bit more sweetness. Anyway, moving on. So we're making our bao dough here. So the unique thing with this bao dough is that you want to mix all-purpose flour, which is what this is here, and then to the all-purpose flour I'm going to add some wheat starch. It's just going to give us that right texture, that kind of just Char Siu Bao texture to your pork buns. So definitely look for the wheat starch at your local Asian supermarket or even online like Amazon or something like that. But usually it's pretty easily accessible if you have an Asian supermarket like a Ranch 99 or something like that. So I'm adding the wheat starch straight in to the all-purpose flour. And then of course we're making bao or bread, so you do need some yeast. Oh, before I add the yeast, I'm actually going to add some sugar. So sugar helps to feed the yeast, but it also just sweetens up your bun. Typically these steamed Char Siu Baos are just slightly on the sweeter side, but also a little bit savory, of course, from our pork filling. So I'm just adding some instant yeast here, which I don't have to bloom or proof beforehand, so I just add that straight into my dry ingredients and just mix all the ingredients together just to make sure it's evenly distributed. But yeah, so you know, if you're using active dry yeast, definitely just add it to the water, which is what I'm adding here. Just some warm water, definitely not hot because you're going to kill your yeast otherwise. But if you're using active dry yeast that comes in those packets, then just go ahead and just bloom it earlier until it's nice and foamy. And so here I'm just stirring all those, the wet into the dry or dry into the wet, making sure that there's no dry pockets of flour left behind. And of course you can use the actual utensil for this, but my utensil this time around is my hand because I am too lazy to wash a wooden spoon or spatula. So at this point I was kind of observing the dough. I think it's important to obviously follow the recipe, follow the ingredients listed and the amounts, but you know, depending on how you store your flour, depending on your actual environment, you know, certain flours may absorb more water or more liquid. So kind of observe it, and you just don't want it to be so dry that it's not coming together, but you also don't want to add too much water. So add little by little, and I'll definitely leave all the amounts in the description box below with this recipe. But I added just a few more tablespoons of water until everything came together and I felt it was adequately hydrated. And at this point I added my oil, so just a little bit of like canola oil, grapeseed oil, or even whatever type of oil that you want. I guess a light olive oil will also work. Just about 1.5 tablespoons. And actually it was somewhat difficult to incorporate. It wasn't that bad, it just took like, you know, extra 5 minutes or so. of some like upper body strength to incorporate this oil. And of course the oil adds some fat and it helps to really tenderize your buns. I guess in theory you can try adding butter, but I've never done it before, and I think most recipes online usually call for like a neutral flavored oil. So I'm just kind of kneading the oil in until it's all incorporated. And like I said, it was a little bit difficult to handle just because like the dough itself was so tight and so strong. So maybe in hindsight I would probably add the oil with the last bit of water, or even like during the process of like adding the water, you can definitely add the oil at that point, and it should be a lot easier for you to incorporate. But either way, I incorporated the oil until it was all incorporated, obviously. And at this point you can kind of notice the texture. If you're doing this by hand, you can really feel like how much smoother it's actually gotten with the addition of the oil. And of course, as you continue to knead, like most bread doughs, it starts to kind of like smooth itself out and just become a really nice, soft, pliable, Play-Doh like texture. So now at this point, once my dough is nice and smooth on the surface, you want to add it into some sort of bowl. I'm just using the bowl that I had earlier that was already lightly greased thanks to the oil. Cover it and just let it proof until it's about double in size. And yeah, it should only take like maybe an hour or so. And this is a unique part of this kind of bread dough that I didn't know beforehand until I did my research. So in order to get the right like leaven and texture to your bao dough, you need to add a solution of baking powder and water. Very interesting, because you don't add this too early on in the process, because otherwise it may not actually be as effective in leavening your bread. You need to add it like after the bread's actually been proofed for the first time. And yeah, that just helps to kind of maintain that you know, texture and appearance for the bun. So that way, because oftentimes I've had the experience personally where the bun just sinks and collapses as it's steaming, and that's so disheartening because you made all this effort to like make the bao dough and then it just looks so ugly. So adding the solution of baking powder and water helps to maintain the shape of your bao. So you can see there, it's kind of like a science experiment. As soon as you add that baking powder in, it starts fizzing up, and yeah, I guess it's just, that means it's reacting, it's working, which is a good thing. And about an hour later, once your dough has been proofed, you can see how like gassy it is. So you want to knock all that air out and basically just knead in that baking powder mixture. So after you've fully incorporated the baking powder solution, you want to roll out the dough into a little cylinder and then cut it into evenly sized portions, and you can just eyeball this, or you can use a kitchen scale. I just kind of used the weight of the dough and just kind of did it, you know, by eye, estimated. And then just take each little dough piece and gather up the edges and then just very roughly roll it into a sphere. Doesn't have to be perfect at this point. I just find that rolling it into a sphere, it only takes like extra minute or so at the most. And like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just makes the bao much more perfectly round. You're pretty much guaranteed to have a perfectly round bun if you do that. So now in the meantime, while the dough is resting for 10 minutes, you want to gather the rest of your supplies. So I'm just using a bamboo steamer, which you could definitely forego if you don't have one. You could just use a plate with a steamer rack and then a pan where you have a lid on it, so that way you can steam your bao. And if you are using a bamboo steamer, definitely just have some pieces of parchment paper so that way the bao doesn't stick to the bamboo steamer. And then at this point, 10 minutes later, my dough is done resting. And I just rolled it out about a 1/4 inch thick or so. Doesn't have to be too exact, to be honest with you. And then take each piece of dough and just place a few fingers like on the bottom towards the center of the dough. And then you want to basically roll and rotate about 45 degrees every time, or after every time you have rolled. You want to rotate that dough and kind of spin it around, so that way you can roll out the edges so they're just slightly thinner than the center, and you're left with a little dimple in the center of your dough. You do need to have the center of the dough slightly thicker. Reason being is because that pork filling is very heavy, and you want to make sure that it can carry the weight of the filling, so that way you're not left with like the filling spilling out of the bottom of the dough, which is not good. So now at this point, you know, our dough is all rolled out. Just basically take a tablespoon of filling. I think it's pretty self-explanatory at this point. Take a heaping tablespoon, and then you basically want to crimp the edges, and you can really just shape your bao any which way you want. It doesn't really matter, to be honest with you. It'll all still taste delicious. And I definitely am no expert, as you can tell there. I just basically take my two, like, index finger and my thumb and pinch the edges together to create like a little pleat, and then I just rotate as I'm pleating after each pleat, and you're left with a little hole there. But don't be deceived, actually this is quite a large hole, and you know, I kind of realized after the fact, after it was done steaming, that the baos expand during the steaming process, and so that hole gets larger. So do keep that in mind. I do recommend, you know, if you don't want such a large gaping hole in your char siu bao, just stick with a smaller hole, or you could just like shape it however you want. It doesn't really matter, to be honest with you. And there's no proofing with this steamed char siu bao. So what you want to do is basically take a wok or some sort of deep-sided pan, fill with some water, place your steamer basket or whatever you're using to steam your bao into the pan, and then turn your heat on to about medium. And you don't have to cover it with anything else if you're using a bamboo steamer like I am, but you want to slowly allow that dough to rise as the water is heating up down below, and this will help give you that right rise and texture, so you know your buns don't overproof. If you want fluffier char siu bao, then definitely let it proof for 20 minutes or so until it's risen a little bit, and then steam. You can see here, like, it's starting to steam. You can obviously see the steam coming through the basket, and after about I would say 15 minutes or so, because my char siu filling was a little bit cold because I had refrigerated it, it took a little bit longer, so anywhere between 10 to 15 minutes it should be done, and you have beautiful steamed char siu bao with large gaping holes. So I had to make it a second time and kind of like correct that, but like I said, it doesn't matter because it's so delicious out of the steamer. It's piping hot, obviously, and be careful not to burn your mouth, but it's so delicious. Tastes just like a dim sum house, so it's sweet and savory, nice and tender. Of course, that bun is so delicious, so it makes a great quick snack, or even like a quick breakfast, if you will. So delicious. I can see why they serve it at dim sum, you know, for brunch and stuff like that. So these are the ones in second batch, which are still not the prettiest looking char siu bao, I'll admit, but it does have smaller holes. So if that concerns you, there you go. Definitely let me know in the comments down below if you make this recipe, and don't forget to subscribe, notification bell, turn that on, and yeah, share the video or recipe if you think anyone would enjoy this or find it helpful. And I appreciate you watching this video and subscribing and commenting, all that great stuff, and have a great day. I'll see you back here next time. Bye.